Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. My guest tonight is a distinguished academic, an internationally recognized researcher and a formidable force in shaping Sri Lanka's higher education landscape. I'm so pleased to welcome to the show Professor Nilanthi de Silva, Vice Chancellor, University of Kelaniya. Good evening and welcome, Professor.
Good evening, Sonali. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely wonderful to have you on the show, Professor. When we speak about academic governance and the importance of ensuring and enabling quality assurance in higher education and integrity, what are some of the challenges that you have faced throughout the decades in university?
Okay, so let me just say this, that it was in about 2000 that the whole concept of quality assurance in higher education was introduced to our university system in Sri Lanka, and that started in the University of Kelaniya. Then Vice Chancellor Professor Kapugamage Tilakaratne said, yes, we need to have much better written identification agreement on what aspects we look at when we are considering the quality of the educational experience that we offer across the university system. So we look at it from an institutional perspective as well as from a program perspective. So from an institutional perspective, we would be looking at things like the common amenities that are available to students, the general structure that is in place for governance and management of the institution, and common aspects like that, maybe the learning resources that we would make available, whether it's a library or ICT infrastructure, etc. In terms of a program, we would be looking at, is that curriculum good, is it up to date, and then do we have adequate staff to teach on that program, do we have adequate facilities to deliver the program properly, and so on. Initially it was a fairly serious struggle to get people to accept the idea of quality assurance.
Right.
Yeah. University academics used to say, this is nonsense. Why are we being made to, do things that are not necessary, and so on and so forth. But over the years, it gained traction, and now we've been through. So the idea was that we would have a review cycle every 5 years. So we should have been in our 4th review cycle, but what with various delays, etc. The entire university system, including Kelaniya, has been through a total of 2 review cycles. We will be going into the 3rd review cycle pretty soon. So the UGC is the one that coordinates that for our state universities, under the 17 universities under the UGC, and that includes undergraduate bachelor's degree programs at internal and external level. We have still to launch into postgraduate education, which is also a very important area. And then the Ministry of Education, the non-state higher education division, is responsible for the quality assurance of institutions that have been given degree awarding status, and their particular degree programs recognized in the private sector. So it's grown and evolved over the last 25 years, and we are in a much stronger position now than we used to be when I first started out in the field, but there is a fairly long way to go as well.
Speaking about infrastructure and prioritization of resources, we need to speak about students with disability. And providing access to higher education institutions. Do you see that there is some sort of traction towards this issue? I mean, Sri Lanka is a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Disabilities of Persons. We have a set of regulations that came in 2006. We have statutory frameworks in place. However, Professor, something that we witness is that Sri Lanka still tends to lag behind because we don't provide dignity to persons with disability. in the higher education sector,
okay.
how do you view this?
Okay, let me step back a little bit, and before I get into the higher education sector, let me share something that, so my area of specialization is not really disability or management of persons with disability, but during the time that I was the dean of the medical faculty, which is like now more than 10 years ago, we had established, and this goes back to Professor Carlo Fonseca's time as dean, a department of disability studies, and we offer now 2 degree programs, then it was 1, which primarily prepares students for working with children and adults who have various forms of disability, speech and language requiring speech and language therapy, or the other specialization is for audiology, people with hearing impairment. Now we also work in occupational therapy as well, which covers the entire spectrum of people with disabilities. During that time, what I realized is that Sri Lanka, maybe like many other Asian countries, maybe like many other South Asian countries, there's a lot of stigma attached to childhood disability, right? So whether it is Down syndrome or child who is born with cerebral palsy or some other form of learning disability, autism, etc., there is a lot of stigma, and so parents find it difficult to accept that their child has a form of disability that needs diagnosis and treatment, and B, in the school education system also there is a great deal of unwillingness to go out of their way to accommodate such children. So that then kind of filters up through the system, so that by the time it comes to higher education and university admission, it's only a very small number of children and young adults who have parents with very supportive parents who are able to make it into the universities. So the UGC has a quota of students for admission of students with special needs. They are usually very often students with visual impairment, so severe or complete blindness, for example, hearing impairment, but also students with physical disabilities, right, and who are wheelchair bound. So there is a quota, and we do get a regular number of students coming to our university of students with special needs. However, the issue is, especially where students are wheelchair bound, we need a lot of resources in order to accommodate those students and give them equal opportunities for achieving the goals that we want them to achieve, because we have learning objectives, program outcomes that we want students to be able to achieve. And when it comes to a problem of, you have 1,000 students who also need hostel accommodation, and the kitty is limited, and do we spend that money on improving the hostel accommodation for 500 students, or do we spend it on putting lifts into 3 buildings, so that students who are wheelchair bound, we have, let's say, 5 students in the university who are wheelchair bound, so that they can get to the top floor of the building. Those are the real practical issues that, as a person who is responsible for ensuring that the budgets are used appropriately, those are the problems that we have to face. But at the same time, there are small things, simple things that we can put into place, ramps instead of stairs, or for students with visual impairment, to enable them to use a computer that they can answer exam papers and examiners can mark it. There are changes that can be brought into place which are, can make a big difference. So it's being aware of it and responsive to those needs.
Absolutely. And also, Professor, I think the common perception is that this is a favor we are doing, but rather than that, the attitudinal shift needs to take place, that this is their rights that we also need to facilitate.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree with you that every human being has a right to be to achieve. So what we have done with the Department of Disability Studies, and we have set up a multidisciplinary center there, the Ayati Center for Children with Disabilities, to support families, children and families with disabilities, to give every child the opportunity to reach their maximum potential, their full potential, right? And so it's that whole change in mindset that we need to bring about in this country. There are practical issues that I mentioned, but if you approach it with that, why can't we do it? It's not a big problem. Just go out of our way a little bit to be a bit more supportive. There's a lot that we can do.
And advocate for prioritization of resource allocation from the state. Professor, when we speak about the qualitative aspect of higher education, state university education, this is a query that I want to ask you. Are there any subject modules that deal with self-worth, dignity, respect for one another?
You put your finger on a point that is really insufficiently addressed in many of our universities, and I think that particular issue leads to a lot of other conflicts and difficulties that students face in not so much in, well, part of it, ragging is also related there, I think, while they are students, but then also after graduation, in finding suitable employment, in finding, in delivering what is expected of them as a graduate, and so on. I know that there has been moves at the level of the UGC to introduce that kind of maybe soft skills, as it were, across the university system, but I see it at the practical down to earth level in our university. I see it operating in two different ways in our own university, right? So if I take the Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies, we have 5 departments of study that offer 13 or 14 degree programs, and then we have the medical faculty. We have a very clear idea of where we expect those graduates to go into after they graduate, right? And in the Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies, they make sure that their students are well prepared while they are undergraduates to go into that work environment. So they really work hard on building that sense of self-worth, the confidence, the ability to talk to other people, make a presentation, convince others of their viewpoint, and so on. Also, I think in Sri Lanka, the ability to talk in English, that confidence is also necessary. Again, that is it. On the other hand, I also have faculties of social sciences and humanities, where the degree programs are a little bit more nebulous, and they don't have a specific employment target group. And so because they don't have that target group, they find it a little bit more difficult to figure out exactly what skills they need to ensure that their students are working, need to acquire. And by and large, a lot of the girls, and those two faculties have like 70, 80, maybe 90% sometimes, are girls, right? Their target then is to either become teachers after graduation in a state school, or to become a civil servant, again become a government employee, right? And the process of employment in those sectors is more related to the qualifications and the paper that you have acquired, and not so much on your ability to talk to people, to present, and so on. And so I find that the development of those skills is not given enough attention. And even if we do try, so for example, we have a career guidance unit, and the current director of the career guidance unit is from the Faculty of Humanities. And when she was first appointed, maybe about 5 years ago, I said, please, you know, your faculty and social sciences is where the unemployment rates are highest. That's the student population we need to target and nurture, so that they are in a better position to find gainful, rewarding employment after graduation. But when the CGU, the Career Guidance Unit, organizes activities that are open to all of the faculties, and it's up to the student to decide, do I want to register for this workshop training program, you know, do I want to develop these competencies, the uptake is least from those faculties. So the awareness among students about the, or perhaps even the confidence that they have, that they can, you know, build themselves up to a level that they can compete with anybody else. So this is something that we need to do right from school level.
Because there have been about 20 to 30 university graduates who I've interviewed, and I've asked all of them, what is your dream? And these are students from rural villages across the country, and none of them have answered that question. So this refusal to be imaginative, this refusal to be joyous in their approach to life, their career, is a common thread that I personally have seen among a minority of students, which I wanted to ask you about.
I think honestly it starts with our school education system, because we train our children to fit into the mold.
Why
you know,
do that,
to work in the box, and you know, we have a set curriculum and a syllabus, and you have to be able to master that syllabus and answer question papers, questions that are targeted to that syllabus. And out of the box learning, creativeness, innovativeness, all of that is generally discouraged by and large. So then by the time a student has reached the age of 18, 19 and they come into university, it's kind of difficult to get them out of that mold that they have been cast into. But we can do it. We need to, and I hope that the education reforms that the education ministry is talking about and trying to bring into effect in the near future will encourage our students to be less exam driven and more about life in general.
Absolutely. Because Professor, this is also then reflected in the jobs they select, the pay that they accept, because it's below par. University graduates are fine with making the bare minimum because they don't have that sense of self-worth that they need to be having, so they don't dream big. And again, this is
so again I think it comes back to, I'm from the medical faculty, which has a different kind of ethos and approach.
Yes.
But I find this comparison and contrast between the Commerce and Management Studies faculty, which largely looks to produce graduates who will find employ, and they are highly employable, those graduates in the corporate sector, as against the other social sciences and humanities graduates, to be very different. And it's those, so maybe it's related to the image, the expectations that we have of females in our country, that young women, once they get married, will give priority to bringing up their children and making a good family. So that's why there are suitable jobs for women and jobs that are not suitable for women. So what is it that is suitable for young women? Going into teacher, so that you have lots of leave during holidays, school holidays, and your actual teaching time is only half the day. or the government sector, where again people see that you can get away with not having to work too hard. So
who is questioning these?
well, I've questioned it at many different fora, but it's the whole of society. So if we take Sri Lanka as a country, as a nation, I have worked internationally in the health sector. My postgraduate training was in the UK, and I really appreciate the fact that in comparison, in contrast with other South Asian countries, our young women, our girls and young women are given the opportunity to continue in higher education, right? So that's a huge bonus that we start off with, right? It's progression from there to the next level and to the work environment that we are kind of stuck at, because if you look at labor force statistics, yeah, the participation of women in the labor force is only about 30%, whereas among the men it's much higher. So there is this general expectation that a man must have a good job and bring home the salary, and a woman needs to take care of the children and look after the home front. And breaking that expectation, that mold, can be very difficult, especially if you are not at a level where you can afford to get childcare, to pay for childcare. And that's one of the big issues that many women, so if I take the university and the employees of the university, again it's about 50-50 now, but the women, the childcare issue at when they, especially if they have young children, you know, is a big problem for them, because if a child falls ill, you need to be available. You need to have, you know, to be assured that while you are at work, your child is being looked after. Yeah. So those facilities are not really available in Sri Lanka. But in the UK also at postgraduate level, I've noticed that, or rather this was when I was a postgraduate student, which is a long time ago, but I don't think it's that different. You know, those choices have to be made, and it's difficult. Now in Sri Lanka, the other bonus is that we still have our extended families. Mothers, grandmothers are willing to chip in and look after kids while the mother is at work. Whereas in those countries in the West, that doesn't happen, right? The extended family network does not work. So that benefit for me personally, that has been something that has really supported my career over the decades.
Right. Professor, I want to ask you to share your perspectives on this issue of university ragging, which continues unabated, notwithstanding laws in place. Do you think we have an epidemic of students with sadism? What is it?
My mindset doesn't accommodate the, I cannot understand the mindset of somebody who gains any form of pleasure from forcing other people to do something against their wishes, whether it is physical harassment or psychological abuse, right? I just find it really difficult to understand that mindset, but I've tried to do so because the problem is so widespread, right? So over the years I've come to a reflection that, so ragging, there is a, so from that initiation, that tribal perspective kind of thing, there are incidents where, for example, what I experienced when I was a medical student, one afternoon where you're called and you're put through some, you know, a little bit of harassment, but it ends there. That's over. It's over and done with, right? But there are other places, times, and it continues even now, where students are subjected to that kind of barrage, maybe physical harassment, maybe psychological harassment, day in, day out, over an extended period of time, right? Now that kind of thing is done on an organized scale with the intention of ensuring that the students, the freshers, are so, how do I put it, they are cowed into towing a certain line, that they will participate in certain activities without question, right? So it's often political protests, going out on the streets, collecting money, kata hollanawa kiyala kiyanne, you know, that kind of thing. So that comes from a different perspective of using students and this phenomenon of ragging, the introduction of the arrival of new undergraduate students or freshers as fodder for a different purpose. I think again over the years that phenomenon has changed and evolved, right? And the physical torture is a lot less than it used to be, right? But it still happens underground, and it is very difficult to get a handle on what exactly is going on, because the freshers themselves will not complain, or else when they are seniors they are doing the same thing. There are freshers who will tell their batchmates, you need to come with us to go and meet the seniors at this time in this place, and take them there, right, to undergo this form of harassment, right? So how do you then get around the mindset of students who think that this is the done thing, that this is how we gain acceptance into this community, into this society? And I'll tell you, it's not just in universities, it happens in, you know, the Kulyapitiya incident was in a teacher college of education. Right. It happens at school level, right? When in schools where students are selected into maybe a team or as a prefect, there is a initiation and a ragging process. So what happens in and universities is an extension of that process, right? So it's that as a society we need to understand and accept that when we have newcomers, arrivals into our society, if we want to make them part of that community, we can do it in a much pleasanter manner. When you have guests coming to your house, this is what I tell our students, you don't welcome them with threats and abuse. You make them actually feel welcome into your house, and you would greet them, and you would you know, entertain them with refreshments, you would talk to them nicely and make friends with them. But there are many students, I believe, who perhaps don't have the social skills to do that, and perhaps to overcome certain social barriers, they resort to.
But because they are in a vulnerable position, Professor, it is the responsibility of the university administration and the government to address this issue in a meaningful manner. It hasn't been done for decades, as a result of which students are suffering psychological harms.
Don't say that, Sonali, because every year that I have been in the university administration, I have had reports. Whenever we have a report of student harassment, we try to figure out what is going on, call the students concerned, say you cannot do this, you cannot behave like this, right, and resolve the issue. Every year in, year out, I've been in university administration now for more than 10 years, right? I don't like the time when freshers come in, because a few months later we are dealing with these problems, right? And I know that for every other vice chancellor, every dean, this is an issue, right? It's not that we have not tried to cope with it, but I tell you something else. And this may be controversial, I may be hauled up for saying this, but if you make a complaint under the Ragging Act, a student can be arrested and a student can be jailed and given a criminal record.
Okay.
Right? If we have a false complaint and somebody is trying to do this to get that student in trouble, that also I have seen happening in the university. I have seen that happening. I don't want to be in a situation where I have ruined a student's career for the rest of their lives, right? Because as a university academic, as a teacher, I like to give my students, however, some of them may be psychopaths, I don't know, right? And I dare say that people who engage in ragging year in year out are psychopaths. I want to give them an opportunity to get that degree and graduate from university. As a teacher, that is my responsibility.
Not from a reactive point of view, but we need to adopt preventative measures and strategies so that it doesn't come to post-abuse situations where measures have to be taken to react and respond. From a preventative point of view, now university administration, ministry, the government has tried to put in place measures. However, this problem continues unabated. As an academic, what do you think the government can assist with? Do you think we need digital tools to be brought in? What is missing?
Okay, I think how I see this as a parallel would be, okay, 40 years ago when I was a medical student, smoking was very common.
Okay.
Right? But over the years, people have understood that smoking is harmful for your health, and the prevalence of smoking among young men has decreased tremendously.
Okay.
Right? And that is because of a concerted awareness program that has gone on over a long period of time. We need that same change of attitude, of mindset among young people who come to universities, that this is not it's not cool, this is not an acceptable form of behavior, right? So it needs to be a society-wide perception, and not with, I don't think that it's a matter of putting blame on people and punishing them, as you are quite right in that it has to be preventative. And we try to do that every year. When students come in, we tell the freshers of their right. We also talk to the senior students about how we expect them to deal with the freshers. But there are other undercurrents at play, other society-wide forces that prevent that message from going through.
Right. Professor, mental health is another aspect that I want your perspectives on. Students coming to university from all walks of life, from all sorts of situations, and there is no proper mechanism that students have where they can, in a safe manner, in a confidential manner, seek counseling. Some of the students need psychiatric care. Right? Most we are surrounded by those in society who are walking around with undiagnosed medical conditions. So, Professor, why don't we prioritize mental health awareness?
There is a lot of stigma associated with mental ill health in this country, in our society, right? And you know, Bali, Tovil, that kind of thing is what our generations before us perceived as being the remedy for mental ill health, right? Having said that, I also need to say that it's perhaps more common in university because it's that age group where serious mental health conditions like schizophrenia, like manic depressive disorders manifest themselves as people are moving into that young adult stage, right? But there are many other conditions, you know, just the additional stress of going through university, change of environment, change of being away from your parents perhaps for the first time in your life, which, you know, really causes students to go through a lot of angst and trauma. At Kelaniya, we have a mechanism where, so we have our medical center. We also have a group of what we call academic support staff, assistant student counselors who have been recruited just for the purpose of supporting students in this kind of issue. We have assigned 2 per faculty, and they are supposed to meet one-on-one with every fresher during the first semester and identify those students who need a little bit of additional help. So the students then turn to these people when they have issues, and then we also have something called the Kelaniya, which is a counseling center which is manned by members of the academic staff on roster, where students with really serious problems can go and seek counseling on a regular basis. The assistant student counselors are available 24/7, and I know many of them have told me we've talked this child out of a suicide attempt, because she called me at 11 in the night, she was desperate, or that student was about to walk out into the sea, and that, so it is possible, we can set in place, but again, like the issue of inclusivity for people with disabilities, we need to have a change of mindset. We need to be aware and concerned that we need to meet those needs. So.
Professor, something that I've realized after having interviewed brilliant people is that we are a country rich with resources, resource persons, experts, and they are not consulted when decisions are being made.
Yes.
So why aren't policymakers consulting the experts? Now, for higher education reform, and now education reform, all of this is interlinked.
Yep.
Why aren't the experts being adequately consulted, meaningfully consulted? Why aren't their perspectives being taken into account?
I think it may be because most politicians, the policy makers, have their eye on the next election and ensuring that they can be voted back into power at the next election. So it's a relatively short-term perspective that we have. Education reforms, on the other hand, take a long time to actually figure out, make sure that everybody's needs are, requirements are taken into consideration, and that the changes that are being implemented will not take us from the frying pan into the fire, but that it will actually improve things for the next generation. And so often the advice that comes from the experts may not be really supporting that short-term gain. Yeah, and so I mean, I've served on so many committees myself in the last maybe 5, 7, 8 years, and we produce report after report, and it seems to gather dust on the shelves. And I myself have worked as Vice Chancellor with I don't know how many ministers of education. Of course, the last 5 years have been exceptionally tumultuous and chaotic, but there has been no consistency in the policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so actually deriving evidence-based policy is what I would like to move towards, to see us moving towards. And in fact, the current Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, Higher Education and Vocational Education, she has commissioned a group of people who work with the non-state higher education division to I'm part of that committee, to talk about how a roadmap, the first part of how we can get to a much better higher education policy. What are the areas that we need to address in the state sector, in the non-state sector, overall vocational education as well. And then from there, what are the detailed areas that need to be addressed, what are the policy changes, and then what is the legislative changes that will need to be. So I haven't lost hope in our system yet. I think maybe over the next year or so we will see some substantial changes.
Professor, when we look at medical research from a gender lens globally as well as from a Sri Lankan perspective, would it be accurate to say that female representation in research samples is far less than that of males. Basically, that most of the research is done based on males.
In general, yes, that is so of medical research, especially in research that is addressed towards development of drugs, medication that would address issues. Say, let's for example, we say hypertension and developing a drug for hypertension or a new antibiotic. Often the trial population may not be actually representative of women who comprise half the population. Yeah. Also, in addition to that, there are health issues that affect only women.
Yeah.
Right? Issues like, say, for example, endometriosis, which is, when you have tissue, uterine lining tissue growing in places outside of the uterus, the womb, or other, things that are related to the female reproductive system.
Yeah.
The amount of funding and the time spent on research and the research outcomes really are not in keeping with the magnitude of the problem. If you ask me why that might be so, I don't have a good reason to offer, except perhaps to say that women's representation in STEM, that is STEM is science, technology, engineering and mathematics, so the science related disciplines, is known to be out of sync with the general population ratios in all parts of the world, whether it's Sri Lanka and Asian developing countries or in Western countries which are much more affluent. Right? So maybe women's issues get neglected and ignored because of that lack of representation. I really don't know. Yeah, could be.
Professor, there's also abysmal resource allocation and prioritization towards research institutions in Sri Lanka. Can you help us understand the sphere of medical research in terms of its prioritization and the quality of research output?
Okay, so yes, you're right that the investment that our country makes in research in general, in research and development, is really inadequate. So for a while we had funding available from the National Science Foundation and from the National Research Council, where not just for medical research but for other research areas, people were able to apply and get funding locally. I know the Health Ministry also used to have for the National Health Research Council some budgetary allocation. However, with the economic crisis, all of that virtually completely dried up, and only this year that it has been kind of coming back to life a little bit. But if you take medical research, I know that colleagues from our faculty and colleagues from other medical faculties have applied and been successful in obtaining grants from international funding agencies.
Right.
So whether it's the Wellcome Foundation or the National Institutes of Health Research in the UK or NIH in the US in the past, we have been able to attract that kind of international research funding, and the output in terms of scientific publications and contributions to the knowledge in the medical spheres in relation to health in Sri Lanka as well as international level has been significant.
Okay.
Because these companies that engage in scientific publications have indices which look at a paper and how often it is cited by other researchers.
Right.
And the output from Sri Lankan medical research, so one means that one paper is cited by another paper.
Okay.
Yeah? But our indices from Sri Lanka in terms of medical research output is well over the average, and definitely above that of what is happening in other South Asian countries.
Okay.
So even though we don't have that much of domestic funding for medical research in this country, I think the quality of research that is going on and the research output and the fact that we have scientists who are named in the top 2% of scientists, that the list that is developed by, published by Elsevier Scopus, Stanford University with Elsevier, has every year between 25 and 40 Sri Lankan academics. The bulk of them are from the medical profession, right?
That's fantastic.
So, it's we don't go around boasting about it, but we are there, and we have been doing a substantial amount of work.
Okay, amazing. Professor, to conclude the interview on a positive note, what is your broader vision for the higher education paradigm in Sri Lanka to make sure that Sri Lanka produces citizens who are not only educated but also inclusive, also imaginative, also joyous?
Okay, that is not something that we can achieve only through the higher education system. It needs to start at school level, when children are in primary school, that they actually enjoy learning and they don't see it as a burden.
Yeah.
Right? So then school needs to be not just simply a series of classes with textbooks and exercises and homework, and then year 5 scholarship at 10 years of age. Students are being put through tuition classes at that age. You need to look at it from a much more holistic perspective, that children are allowed the freedom to develop whatever talents and skills that they have, not just within the textbook but extracurricular as well. And then identify what they are good at, and a perspective where vocational education is not seen as something for those who have failed in the school system, but for people who have those skills and those abilities. And with that transformation, we will have a much more inclusive and accepting, much more joyous set of learners than we do now. That's the change that I would like to see happening in this country, in our education system.
Sure. Professor Nilanthi de Silva, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Sonali. I've enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.